Hello, my name is Lisa Schaefer, and I am conducting today's webinar, which is called Time to Shine, Communication and Accountability. This was a presentation that was hosted today at the University of Dubuque campus between noon and 2, and I'm going to highlight some of the topics and information that was presented to that group for those of you that were unable to attend. So I'm excited to be able to share with you a little bit of information in regards to communication and accountability. So to start us off, one of the big things that I talk about in regards to leadership and communication is this whole idea of what mask are you wearing? Did you wake up and do you find yourself coming to work saying, man, I really get to do this life. I get to do this job. I'm excited to be able to work with outstanding people who understand and communicate effectively with me. When you're in this mask of I get to do things, you're finding yourself a little bit more energized and willing to respond to strong communication and accountability. Or do you find yourself waking up in the mask of, I gotta do this. I have to be here. I have to work with people that are frustrating. I have to try to get people to do things that they don't want to do. I'm just stressed. Depending on what mask you're wearing, of course, is going to be the impact of the communication that you have with individuals. Then I always ask, sometimes we start out with good intentions and we may say, man, I'm excited to do life today. Maybe there's a frustrating email or there's a frustrating phone call. But then we bounce back to, well, there was a helpful colleague who is joining me and encouraging me. We may bounce back and forth between these masks depending on the situation that we are encountering. Also, I like to say, ultimately, it's how we're responding to certain situations that can be frustrating. So we're going to really look at this idea of communication. And when we're in this get to mask, how are we effective? And we're in this gotta mask, how can this be a demotivator? Because generally, we have about 60,000 thoughts a day. And during those 60,000 thoughts, do you find yourself living more above the line, or do you feel yourself living more below the line? Oftentimes, thoughts dictate our feelings and our behaviors. And do you find yourself giving your day away because of the frustration that you're experiencing? Or are you finding yourself trying to find some type of good in every situation that you are involved in, especially with communication and accountability? There's a philosophy of leadership right now, which is called the Top 40 Leadership Principles, and they talk a little bit about this above the line leadership communication. Do you find yourself having more of a positive view of life and how you see the world? Are you more energetic? Are you more focused on what's important? Do you find yourself having more positive attitudes and beliefs? And really, are you what I call a hope dealer? A person who speaks optimistically about the future, especially if there's change that's coming into play. Do you speak about how the change will impact and be successful and effective in helping people live happier lives? Or do you find yourself below the line? And oftentimes when we talk about this idea of below the line, this is where you may see a little bit more of a negative view on life. When you're falling below the line, you might have some depressing moods, you might lose focus on what's important, and you can get caught up in this humdrum of daily grind where it's like, oh, is this ever going to change? Are these people ever going to be doing what they're supposed to be doing? And sometimes when you fall below that line as a leader, it can be challenging because sometimes you may feel powerless over the situation. But again, where do you spend most of your time? Hoping that most of your time is spent above the line and not necessarily below the line, because this is a way that we want to try to communicate. And as we communicate, oftentimes we get into struggles because we're trying to communicate in our fashion, our way of communication. And sometimes it's difficult because people may understand us in different ways. I always like to put this little slide up here talking about, is there a right way or a wrong way of communication? They both do the same things. If you're driving up and down the Mississippi and you decide to dock your boat at one of the places, there are the establishments along the way, does your rope look more to the right or does it look more to the left? And oftentimes I ask people to really talk about, which way is the right way? And when I do this in front of groups, a lot of times people will have a strong opinion about which way is the right way. And they'll tell me, Lisa, the other way looks sloppy. The other way looks messy. The other way makes somebody look lazy. Or somebody will say on the other side, that takes too long. They're wasting time. They're not necessarily having to do it that efficiently. So you see there's differences of opinions in regards to how we communicate. And often when we communicate, are we communicating too much in our own value systems, or are we trying to understand people? Because people really teach us something, and they're put in our place to help us learn a little bit more about where they're coming from. So there's an assessment I always like to give as well, is to find out if you're a right fighter. You know, do you think your way is the best way and the only way? And if people would just do what you say, how you say it, that would be the best way for life. And I give this quick assessment. Is there a right way or a wrong way? You know, again, there's just differences. They both do the same thing. But again, there's different ways that we see things. And that's what we think is important in our regards to our colors of communication. Because there's so many different ways that we can ultimately connect and see and move forward. There's even more ways. Again, some people are just happy that there's toilet paper. Who cares if it's over or under or sideways, as long as it's there. But we look at ultimately this idea of the colors and how this assessment helps us understand 4 different ways that we interact with people and 4 different styles. Now, again, the Real Colors is an inventory that you can take to kind of help you identify what your main style is. Do you find yourself more on the fast-paced side of things? Or do you think of yourself as more cautious, more methodical? Do you think first and then speak? Or do you speak first and then think? Are you more into process and how to get results? Or do you find yourself more engaged in the people and how to encourage and develop the people? Again, there's 4 different styles or 4 different colors based on the colors index. There's what's called the orange. The orange style focuses very much on fast-paced, making quick decisions, but also on the process. Let's make sure we're getting it done the way it needs to get done. Very results-focused. The blues find themselves in a who style. Who is involved, who's going to be a part of this decision-making, who's it impacting, and then ultimately the blues believe in the idea of relationships. How is that relationship going to be impacted? There's a style of communication called the gold style. And they're the individuals that always want to know how you want it done. How is it supposed to be? What's the rules? What are the traditions? What is it that is the guideline for process? Oftentimes they are the policy and process developers in that gold fashion. And finally, we have what's called the green color. And the green color is focused very much on kind of data, research, statistics, and really want to be communicated with that type of information. They always want to know kind of the why. So there's 4 different approaches to the way we communicate. Again, similar things in common, but also there's some differences that happen. When you're looking at the colors, I always ask people to do kind of a small group activity and focus on the color that is their least strongest style. The reason I ask people to get into their least color is because oftentimes we know, well, I'm an orange, so I'm very quick and I'm very fast. Or I'm a gold, I don't like conflict, I don't want change, I want things to go well. Again, we may speak in our own style, but the goal of communication is to be able to understand our opportunities, our lowest color, and try to learn the communication strategies for that color, because we want to try to be able to speak in the color of the language that people are coming to us with. So in the small group activity, I always ask, think about this color and what's important to that color. What's the best way to communicate with that color? When faced with change, what do they do? What values do they think are important in order to work as a team if they're this color? And how do you handle conflict? Plus, another big thing is, what are the pet peeves in communication in the workplace? You know, when we're looking at the different colors, there's different styles and approaches. For example, the communication tool of email. Email is one of the most popular forms of communication right now in the workplaces. However, email can be very challenging in being effective in communication because there's different ways or different styles to present an email. For example, if I'm going to send an email to an orange, I want it to be short, sweet, to the point with an actual directive of what needs to be accomplished. I may even, in my subject line, put something like, please address today, or this is a high priority today, or action needed today. Because again, oranges are very much focused in that fast-paced, and they don't want to have to read a whole bunch of information. They may read only the first line in an email. My blues, if you're sending an email, they want to have the niceties. They want to have kind of, they're the ones that have a lot of emojis in their emails. They're the ones that basically are, how are things going? What's working? How was your weekend? How's the family? They want that relationship piece in a part of an email. Let's say you're emailing a gold. A gold wants to know kind of that order of importance of what do you want done, how do you want it done, and ultimately, how are you going to measure me on it? I always like to share with my golds that emails to them are really kind of bullet points. They're checklists, because golds do really like kind of that checklist and timeline as to what you want it approached. My greens usually are the ones that want the most in email. They're the ones that want the who, what, where, when, why, how. And oftentimes the green style of email has a lot of text in it, because they want to be able to answer all of those questions. So as we look at communicating, we've got to be able to understand which is the color that is the biggest opportunity for us, and what do we need to do. So I'm going to give you some strategies just to kind of look at where you're at with some of these assessments. And again, if this is something that you want to look at as an assessment, please contact Julie or Valerie in HR, because they will be able to assist you with that. But what you're going to see is with oranges, if you are communicating with an orange, they will like to ask a lot of what questions. What do you want me to do? What's the importance of this? What's the impact that it's going to be? And my oranges usually have a conversation they like to tell. I need you to do this. You have to do this. We have to get this finished. Versus asking, can you help me? Can you get this done? Oranges also have an approach that they're very quick in their speech, and they're very open with their opinions. The intention is not to be derogatory in any way or to come across as too assertive or aggressive, but they really like to get their opinions across, and they like to share their ideas, and they get right to the issue. And sometimes people can feel as though they're being confrontive or combative, but really they just want to be able to get the results that are necessary. So let's not waste a lot of time on things that don't matter. Let's just get it out on the table, and let's solve it, and let's come up with a solution. Let's get it done. That's very much a communication style for an orange. If you want to communicate with an orange and you're not an orange, let's say that's your lowest, you want to try to be brief and to the point. Too much information can cause an orange to disconnect. Listening for an orange, they need to have some energy. They want you to have some confidence when you're sharing some things, and they want you to be, like I said, very brief and very bold, sticking to the topic and keeping things moving. They need to have you have clear expectations. What specifically do you want? Because the one thing they do not want is they do not want to be micromanaged. So if you can give them specific communication on what your expectations are while you're showing confidence and competence to them, and let them know what's on your mind, that becomes an important. And if you're trying to supervise and communicate with an orange, give them a chance to express themselves. What do you think should be done? What's working? Give them a chance to act quickly. Let's just try it. Let's see what happens. Sometimes, again, they want to be able to defy the risks. They want to take a chance. They want to use their intuition because it has proved them correct in the past. They have kind of this idea of wanting different experiences. They may get bored rather quickly. So again, when you're talking and communicating with an orange, you want to talk about, hey, I really have this great challenge for you. I think this is something that you could really innovate for us. I really need you to kind of focus on what you can do to make this a better situation. Focusing on that type of language when speaking with an orange is a good way to approach them. Now, the other style that you're going to see is what we call the blue style. And a blue style, again, when they're communicating, they're always asking who's involved. For example, a blue, if they're asked to be on a committee, they'll want to know, well, who's leading the committee? Who's on the committee? Who's the committee impacting? They like to make small talk. They sometimes find themselves going off onto tangents because they love telling stories. And they may have some long stories because they need to express feelings and emotions when they're storytelling. And also, you'll see sometimes blues like to exaggerate. When you're trying to communicate with a blue, try to approach them kind of informally. They don't want to have this whole you better, you have to, you should approach, because that's what we call a parent voice. When people get into a parent voice, oftentimes the response is for somebody to go into what we call a child voice. I don't want to, I don't have to, you can't make me. So again, trying to approach them a little bit more informally and not coming across as you better, you have to, you should. When you're talking with blues, try to remind them of how important what they're doing. Your role right here is essential because this is happening. We call that situation, behavior, and impact dialogue. So SBI, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. When you're speaking with a blue, use some humor, give some public appreciation, and really try to provide some written details, but not facts, because they don't necessarily want all the statistics and data. They just want a few written details. And they want to be able to relate to what you're saying, and they especially want to be able to relate to what you're feeling. Blues, when you can speak with emotion, that's causing them actual motion. So if they feel as though, you know, you're genuine and you're have this desire to help, they are much more inspired by your communication. And really, they focus a lot on this idea of putting people's needs ahead of procedure. If you communicate too much on, this is the policy, this is the procedure, this is how it has to be done, oftentimes you're going to lose the blues. They're not going to be as attentive or actually hearing what's being said. And big thing with blues too is also keeping your promises. They believe in having that idea that it's essential to definitely do what you say you're going to do. And if you're going to support blues, reassure them. You know, oftentimes a little bit of self-confidence can be a boost. And if you're going to give criticism, put it in a way that makes them feel like it's a part of the team. So how do I provide criticism, makes them feel a part? Well, here's what we did. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work. Here's what we want to do different next time. What are your thoughts? That's a good way to kind of dialogue and have some of that communication. You also want to recognize their accomplishments and really try to provide a harmonious environment. You know, the blues are the ones that are bringing the candy, they're bringing the potluck, they're trying to get people to connect outside of work because they want that strong relationship factor. And really, they're excellent at remembering personal dates, events. They're excellent at remembering names. So again, some strong assets to that group as well. When you're talking to golds, one of the things that you want to focus on is this idea of trying to be logical and systematic. You know, golds like to ask a lot of the how's questions. How's this going to be done? How's this going to work? They like to listen more than they actually like to talk. They're trying to take in everything as much as possible so that they have a better understanding of what's happening around them. They can be reserved with their opinions. And they are also, like blues, very good with using first names and remembering people's names. So they believe in that kind of recognition part and being able to give people recognition using their names. They like the checklist, they like the procedures. But one thing that can be a disadvantage for golds is they do not like the idea of change. If they need to change, one of the things that we encourage is communicating early what that change might look like. Letting them know this is kind of what we're thinking about. And again, giving them some references towards that can be helpful. And then also, golds usually are the ones that are trying to keep on the traditions. They want to focus on that tradition. So they want to talk about, you know, how things are working, what's been done in the past. They want consistency. They want to make sure that everything's firm, fair, and consistent. They want feedback. They want rules. They want regulations. They want some security because, again, it's important for them to be able to understand that they are safe in their jobs and that things will change. And when they do change, how it's going to impact and help them be more efficient in their jobs, okay? They are excellent also at organization. So when I'm talking to a gold, I'm trying to talk in kind of prioritizing order of what's important, okay? When you're looking and speaking with greens, some of the things that greens like to focus on is a lot of the data, statistics, and the why. You know, what's going on? Why are we doing the things that we do? They like to ask more than tell, and they definitely listen more than they talk. One thing I see with greens is they take more time to answer questions that are posed to them. They want to have information ahead of time. They want to be able to, if you want them to respond to something, they'd prefer to have you send them an email list of questions you're going to ask them so they have time to think on it, because they are very precise and detailed when they communicate, and they really, really need time to think. They are definitely the individuals who I like to say think first and then speak. However, if they're faced with too many oranges or blues who are trying to push them to talk faster, they may shut down. So again, try to give some clear expectations, try to be precise and focused. And really with the greens, they do value high standards. They want knowledge and they want people to be credible. And they want you to be loyal and dependable in your communication as much as possible. And if you're trying to supervise or support a green, giving them feedback, especially on the quality of their work, okay? They want you to recognize capabilities. They want you to set some reasonable deadlines, but also be flexible on those deadlines, because what greens start to do is they start to find more information out. and they like to explore all avenues of anything before a decision is made. For example, I like to say that greens like to be a mile deep in their knowledge versus an orange or a blue who wants to be mile wide. They need to, again, have some thought out answers, and they may sometimes come across as cynical, or they may criticize, but the intention is that they are playing devil's advocate. They're the ones who, I guess, are communicating, again, what are best practices, what's just statistically significant, and what's important. So that's kind of the one tip on the communication, is really trying to understand those 4 different styles. The next thing that we talk a little bit about is, once you understand how to communicate with individuals based on their styles, meeting halfway. If I'm an orange and you're a gold, our goal is to try to meet halfway. I don't want to jump all the way into your gold style, and you don't want to jump all the way into my orange style. We definitely want to be able to meet in the middle. By meeting in the middle, though, it's really important for us to really look at our expectations and how we're communicating those expectations to the people around us. Because we teach people how to treat us, and whatever we ignore, we allow. So the behaviors that you're deciding to kind of just let happen, you got to be okay with those, unless you set some good expectations. So I always like to ask the question, what if? What if your boss came in tomorrow morning and said, you know what, today I'm going to hold you accountable. If you do a great job today, I'm going to give you a $1,000 bonus. If you do an average job, well, you'll be able to keep your job. But I'm going to tell you, if you're doing a bad job, you're fired. What would be the first thing you want to know? Most people say, well, Lisa, I would really, really want to know how you're going to be evaluating me on what's considered great, what's considered average, and what's considered bad. But oftentimes we just make assumptions, and we just assume people know what great is, or we assume they know what average is, or they assume what bad is. We cannot assume. So we need to communicate what are our expectations, and be very vivid on what you're expecting. One of the big words that people are still having struggles with is, I want people to be professional. Well, what does professional mean? Professional means so different. It means a lot of different things in different cultures. Some companies will say, well, professional means you get your work done, but you can come to work in jeans, you can swear, you can do whatever you need to do. Understand your audience. Some companies say, no, you've got to come in a suit and tie, and you must be very articulate in your communication, and you should never swear. And what are your expectations? What is it? And be very, very specific. Oftentimes things are just too vague, and then we interpret based on our previous experiences. So what is it you specifically are going to measure? What's specifically important? As you're supervising people, what are my performance reviews going to look like? How are you judging me? What's a 5 for success look like? What's a 1 look like? Having some of those rubrics can be important. And then really, follow through on, what can I expect to have happen if I do this, this, or this? And we always talk about SMART goals. That's what I have under great job, average job, and you're fired, is what's a SMART? What's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely for the people that you're working with? And are you specifically stating how you're going to measure that expectation? What's going to be done, by when, and by whom? And how committed are you to make that happen? If you're trying to put in a culture of accountability, I always like to ask people on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being I'm not committed, to 5 being yes, I'm all in. How committed are you to making this happen? And what will happen when the results are achieved? What can I expect to have happen? If I keep doing this, what can I expect in return? And that's just human nature. People want to know and be reinforced for the behaviors that you want to increase. And why is it important to the team? And what will I do that I have to hold myself accountable? So again, a SMART goal activity. The behaviors then, as you're starting to look at, what are my expectations and what are those behaviors, as you start to bring in this attitude of accountability, do you find yourself speaking more about behaviors you want to try to increase, or do you speak more about the behaviors you're trying to decrease? Now, I'm referencing a book called The Oz Principle that really is an effective book that's looking at how we're trying to hold people accountable in our communication, and who we're trying to hold accountable for achieving results. Oftentimes, when we're doing behavior reinforcement or leadership or influence, we look at the behaviors we want to try to increase. So are you complimenting the people on what they're doing well? Hey, Jill, great job with that student today. You really were able to show patience. You had a great tone. You were presenting in a good fashion. Hey, Joe, I really like how you were able to turn that room around so quickly. You really looked at the detail. You know, you took the extra time to make sure that the tablecloths were clean and the floor was clean, et cetera, et cetera. Are you speaking more on the behaviors you want to increase? Or are you focusing more on the behaviors you want to try to decrease? What the Oz principle says that when you're looking at accountability, the more you can focus on the behaviors you want to increase and reinforce those over and over, the easier it is to have those crucial conversations when there's behaviors that you need to try to decrease. And how you see these people, the frame you put them in, can definitely impact how we communicate with them. You know, so if we're seeing somebody as the Debbie Downers or the negative Nellies, and we see them as the people that are just challenging to work for, we often feel as though they're frustrating. And what do? We might ignore them, or we might tolerate their behavior because we say to ourselves, that's too big of a fight. I don't want to pick that kind of fight. So what do you get? Well, you get somebody who's still negative because nobody wants to approach them and coach them on their negativity. And this cycle just keeps going over and over. I always like to say in your communication, how can I see it differently? So maybe, you know, maybe they're coming across as real negative. Well, what's going on outside? Is there something that is happening at home? Is there experiences that maybe they don't have the skill set? People don't do what they're supposed to do because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know why they're actually supposed to be doing it, or they don't know how they're supposed to do it. And if you really want people to change, they either have to learn enough or hurt enough to want to change. And so we have to really think about what is our frame of mind when we're supervising these individuals, and what can we do to make them more effective? Because you may have some of your staff who are kind of a pain. They may say, well, it's not my job. They may say, well, that's above my pay grade. They may have this kind of negative attitude towards the positions that they're currently in. And when you're finding people who are kind of in that victim mentality and feeling as though things aren't fair and are frustrating, then it becomes a coachable moment. You know, we need to ask, why are they fighting so hard for what they want? What's happening? How can I be empathetic and try to understand where they're coming from, but still hold high expectations? Some of the questions I like to ask staff when I'm supervising them and they get in kind of in this negative attitude, I like to start with, help me understand what's going on. Help me understand what do we need to do different. Help me understand what you need to do different. And what can we do to make this a more positive experience for both of us? And kind of having those crucial conversations becomes important. Because ultimately, as you're looking at this above the line, below the line types of accountability, in the Oz principle, they talk about when you stay above the line, you are seeing things, you're recognizing it, you're owning it, and then you're also becoming a problem solver instead of just a problem namer. And then you're doing it, you're following through, you're committed, you're saying, I'm willing to make this commitment and I'm gonna do what I say I'm gonna do. But if you find your staff falling below the line, you're seeing behaviors like, it's not my job, I'm just gonna ignore it, it's somebody else's fault. You know, that finger pointing becomes really stressful for people. And it just maybe just tell me what you want me to do, because I'm just confused, I don't know what's going on. And maybe they may see this idea of, I'm just gonna wait and see, I'm not gonna do anything to see what happens. So again, if you find a lot of those behaviors that are below the line, then there's a fear factor for accountability that's happening right now. We want to be able to allow people to make mistakes. And oftentimes there's companies that say, let's encourage mistakes, because mistakes become our learning opportunities. So let's see what the mistake is. Let's own it. What do we need to do different next time? That's solving it, and then do it the next time. So some of the good conversations I like to have in communication with staff is, you know, what worked? What didn't work? What are you going to do next time? And again, that kind of moves them through that above the line process. Because we want to hold people accountable and our communication accountable, it's got to be a part of what we consider self-reflection. You know, I can sit here and tell you in my communication, well, you're not doing this well, this isn't working, this isn't. Most people know areas of an opportunity and improvement, okay? The best thing that you can do is just start asking some questions. You know, help them get into what we call the accountability loop versus the victim loop, okay? So if we have particular behaviors that maybe we think we want to help people change, we have to help them recognize that this is a behavior that is impacting people. So again, this is what I call the situation, the behavior, and the impact. So for example, somebody's not showing up, attendance is an issue. Help them recognize why their attendance is so important. Did you know that every time that you're not here, Jill, your team has to work short and people have more pressure and the stress is more in depth? Talk about what that behavior is and what that impact is on the staff. That might help them own it a little bit more, because once we get them to own it, then basically we can say, you know what, let's just try and do something different next time. What do you think it's going to take? What's it going to take for you to be able to show up here every day? What's important? Let's really think about those SMART goals. What's going to be specific? What's going to be measurable? What do we need to learn so that we can take action? That is an accountability loop. Because the last thing we want is we don't want people stuck in the victim loop. And they say about 10 to 15% of your staff are going to fall in this victim loop. And this is what we call external locus of control. So they think everything's happening to them. These are the people that are talking about, this isn't fair, life's not fair, this sucks. They're the real negative people that are bringing kind of that process. I like to ask these people, what do you have control over right now? I got control over nothing. What do you have control over? You have control over your attitude. You have control over how you relate to others. You have control over the mindset that you're bringing to the table. You know, I want to help them recognize these things, because if we just ignore it, we deny it, and we just say, well, that's just Jill being Jill, that really starts to bring down the team attitude. And that takes accountability away, because then people are going, well, why does Jill get to get away with that kind of attitude? Why does Jill get to get away with these different types of things? So again, we want to get people out of that victim loop. Like I said, 10 to 15% have what we consider an external locus of control. That's what I would encourage talking with HR to think about, how I can do a referral to maybe an employee assistance program, or trying to help connect people to see that, you know, victim mentality is keeping them stuck in certain scenarios or certain situations. So that becomes important. As you look at personal accountability, again, the OZ Principle is an excellent book to try to focus on how do we see it, how do we own it, how do we solve it, and what do we do to make it different, okay? And that's really trying to think about, you know, can I get some feedback from people? Can people tell me what's working, what isn't working? You know, am I ready to hear what's not working? Am I ready to ask and offer up and be candid about what's working? And can I start to build some of this trust? Because the more we can start showing our own personal accountability, modeling the behavior we want to see, the more successful we're going to be able to communicate with the people around us. Accountable people are really seeking feedback. And when they seek feedback, they start to create more accountable people. And then the cycle just continues. So again, you know, I'm going to ask what's working, what isn't working, what can I do different? And then I'm going to ask them, what do you think's working? What do you think you could do different? Again, just having that dialogue of feedback becomes super important, especially if it's behaviors that you see ultimately they're not doing as effectively as they could be. So when you're looking at feedback, you know, especially if you're doing performance reviews, you're giving information to people, here's some focused feedback. And it's really kind of one, you know, here's where I feel you demonstrate, and talk about all the positives. You know, here's where you demonstrate good customer service. Here's where you demonstrate good attitude. Here's where you demonstrate and meet the expectations of the department, okay? And then you can say, well, here's where I feel you could demonstrate even more. So you could demonstrate even more. Look, what do you need to do to be 1% better? So here's where, have you ever thought about this? Here's where I see this. What do you think? Again, giving that focused feedback. But then you also give them a chance to share feedback with you. You know, what can I do to assist? What's working for you? What feedback do you have for me around this? And then don't forget to thank people for their feedback. You know, sometimes people are like, I've got to be brave to be able to get this focused feedback. And they do, especially if you're speaking sometimes to people who have come across as more confident than others. You know, thank them for the feedback. People fight for things because there's a reason they're fighting so hard for it. So I always like to ask people, why are you fighting so hard to do this? Why is this so important to you? Help me understand. What can we do different? The other big thing that we focus on is this idea of really, you know, trying to be active in your listening. So asking them, you know, what's working, what isn't working? Give me some ideas on how to help you plan your own development. You know, where's your reality check? Sometimes we also need a reality check ourselves. You know, did I come across too difficult in that meeting? Did I sound kind of crabby in that meeting? Was I too harsh? Was I too soft? Should I have pushed more? Should I have asked more questions? Ask people feedback, because oftentimes people always want to know, how'd I do? And feedback nowadays helps with our accountability. They always talk about, if you're giving feedback, if you give 10 positive feedbacks for every one negative feedback, that's going to help improve kind of that relationship, because we often focus on the negative, but we've got to be able to hear the positives as well. So are you giving positive feedback on a daily basis? And I did say daily because people want feedback on a daily basis. We are raised right now in a society that wants instant gratification and feedback. If I post something on Snapchat, I want somebody to respond to me quickly. If I'm on Instagram, Facebook, any of those social medias, we're constantly looking for some type of reinforcement or feedback. The other thing that you want to think about in regards to feedback, especially in your communication, you can ask your employees that work for you, what should we do? What should I start doing? Are there things that I'm not doing that I should be? Are there things that I can do to help get better results? And then ask your team as a team, what do you think we should be doing? What should we start doing? You can ask them, what should we stop doing? Are there things that aren't working? Is the things that I'm doing that's impeding our communication? And then what do we need to continue to doing? What's working well? How can we make it even 1% better? Those are 3 questions that oftentimes I ask within team scenarios or team situations. If communication is a big area for us and, we're having difficulties surrounding certain things, what do we need to do to start building our communication up? What do we need to stop that's getting in the way of good communication? What do we need to continue? Because when we are communicating well, what's it look like? So that becomes a big important factor in this communication as well. Again, I've referenced the odds principle, and I really love the quote that they post out of it, is only when you assume full accountability for your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, and your results can you actually direct your own destiny. Otherwise, somebody else or something else will. And ultimately, we want to be able to communicate in a way that's helpful, not hurtful, and again, encouraging and uplifting, because most people are motivated through positive reinforcement. So if you have any questions in regards to kind of this main topic or brief understanding of some of the things in communication or accountability, please feel free to email or give me a call. Again, there is a videotape as well that was done of the workshop today, so you can definitely get in contact with Julie or Valerie in the HR department. Otherwise, thanks so much for being here today. Hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to an opportunity of working with you, hopefully, sometime in the future. So again, thank you for being here and listening in on this webinar.